Hello, beloveds. This is H.N. Gibson, also known as Nerdy Cleric. My pronouns are they and them. And I wanted to record a reflection yesterday, but ended up recording it today because I needed a little bit more time to percolate on a few things. Fair warning, this reflection is mostly me speaking to a Christian audience and those interested in Christianity. I also wrote this before the events in Venezuela, and I'm still looking for the words to speak directly to the nuances of that event and what has come since. I am not an expert in global politics. What I do know is that Jesus is more than likely facepalming. Like, empire building is bad. It's not good. Loving and leaning into community is good, is something that Christ spoke a lot about. There is no Christian justification for war, by my own estimation. It just is. Yet I've heard some Christians and church leaders trying to justify the actions of the U.S. president and administration. And for now, all I want to say is this. One thing can be wrong, and our response to it can also be wrong. Just because something is bad, or because someone is doing bad things, that is not a justification for doing a bad thing yourself. It's a childhood ethic that I learned, and maybe it's not as applicable as it once was. Just because so-and-so does something, does that mean that you should do it? But ethics are murky. And Christian ethical response is hard, in large part thanks to the topic of my reflection for today. And that reflection is based on a question. Is God still speaking? And what does the closed canon have to do with it? During the 4th century, early church leaders decided to close the canon of the Bible. Since then, there has been ongoing debate about this move. During the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther went so far as to question some of the canon, demoting books like James and Revelation and separating out a chunk of the Hebrew scriptures known widely as the Apocrypha. The central question for me, though, comes down to, is God still speaking? It would seem the early church councils, mostly men but largely influenced by some women, which is a whole wider conversation, did not intend to say God stopped working in the world or stopped speaking in the world, but rather wanted to set an end to the biblical story, to wrap things up. Whether that was control or simplification of ongoing religious political strife is a whole other conversation as well. But can you imagine if they hadn't closed the canon? The Bible is already used to manipulate so much of how we relate to one another and creation more generally. Would Christianity have survived had they not closed the canon? What would it look like today if they hadn't? Would there be even more denominations and sects of Christianity? How diverse would the interpretation of Christ have become? What other books might have been included? Would we have been destined to eat our own tail in a cycle of ill-defined conversation? Now, I am no proponent of the closed canon, but I do appreciate the foresight of the early church leaders in closing the canon. Note, I do not appreciate it in a way of agreement necessarily, so much as an intellectual understanding of how they were confronting the ongoing religio-political realities of their age. But I digress. Is God still speaking? Well, yes. I do think God is still speaking. I've experienced this in my own life. I do, however, feel wary of giving too much leash to what God decrees, as we still have a variety of cult adjacent to straight up cult followings of particularly charismatic leaders claiming to know what God decrees for our age. It's a delicate balance. And I'm thankful to have a set amount of writings to pull from in determining what is core to the Christian message. Yet when this is used to silence curiosity, then I have a problem. Worse, when the closed canon is used to strangle creativity and complexity out of our faith, that runs counter to the entirety of what Christ stood for, the entirety of the Christian narrative, the entirety of what Scripture is about. The books that were chosen were not meant to stifle creativity or give all the answers, but to be a place for us to go to in speaking to our own context and figuring out how to apply Christ's message of love and peace more broadly. Consider, if you will, during the civil rights movement, we had plenty of white supremacists, such as the Methodist Laymen's Union in Alabama, using Scripture to silence dissent from segregation and bolster their own way of viewing the world. At the same time, we had Martin Luther King Jr. and Fred Shuttlesworth, among other Christian leaders, preaching an expansive gospel that supported integration and shared humanity. Both existed at the same time. Both cited Scripture. Both thought their reading of Scripture was right. But one preached separation, and the other preached union. So, which was God speaking? Hindsight being 2020, many have come to see the words of King and Shuttlesworth as being more compelling. However, there remains a remnant of segregation that I have encountered over the years and am happy to speak more about in private settings. For now, I will just say this. Segregationist theology did not die with George Wallace. If you believe that it did, let's get coffee sometime. What it comes down to in a large part is that we've experienced this democratization of American religion, which is a great book if you want to check it out. Put another way, we often find ourselves answering the question, what is going to be the most compelling to the greatest number of people? It's consumer Christianity. It's capitalist Christianity. It's democracy rather than looking to the meaning of the Scripture and figuring out what it contextually actually means. We're not asking what is right or wrong as often as we are contextualizing religion and theology, which is not a bad thing. but it is risky. It means taking something authoritative and trusting one another to interpret it, even when our interpretations are different. But that's the beauty of creation in a lot of ways. We get to have different perspectives. So is God still speaking? Yes. Yes, God is still speaking. And for better or for worse, only more questions come from that. As such, I'll leave you with this. If God is still speaking, who is God speaking to and through? If God is still speaking, whose God is right? If God is still speaking, what do we do with the conflicts that arise from our individual and communal answers to the questions of who is God speaking through and which of those interpretations are right?